If you close this video right now, you will permanently lose the information that separates the 5 nuts that function as precision biological fuel for adults over 60 from the 5 that Western nutrition guidelines still classify as healthy, but that are silently contributing to bone density loss, chronic inflammation, cognitive decline, and dangerous interactions with the medications that 43% of adults over 65 take daily, being a distinction that Japanese and South Korean geriatric nutrition guidelines have incorporated since 2001, while Western dietary recommendations continue treating all nuts as interchangeable sources of healthy fat. Because the difference between a 70-year-old body and a 30-year-old body is not simply that it needs more nutrients, but that it processes certain compounds more slowly, accumulates certain toxins more readily, and is more vulnerable to the specific mineral interference that several widely consumed nuts produce at the exact biological sites where bone density, muscle maintenance, and cardiac function are already under maximum age-related stress. Most people over 60 have been told that nuts are healthy, full stop. The conversation typically ends with a general recommendation to eat a handful of mixed nuts daily as a source of healthy fat, protein, and antioxidants. After 26 years studying the intersection of traditional East Asian geriatric nutrition and Western clinical research, I can tell you that this blanket recommendation is one of the most consequential nutritional oversimplifications in modern medicine for adults in their 60s and beyond. The aging body after 60 is a physiologically distinct environment in which toxin clearance is reduced by 30 to 40%. Mineral absorption is measurably less efficient, and the capacity to metabolize specific compounds found in certain widely consumed nuts creates risk profiles that simply do not exist at 30. The 5 nuts I am going to tell you to avoid are not junk food. They appear on every healthy eating list published in the last decade. That is precisely why this conversation matters. My name is Dr. Jae Yoon. I am a physician trained in both Western clinical medicine and traditional East Asian integrative medicine, and I have spent 26 years studying why older adults in Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan maintain cognitive function, bone density, leg strength, and metabolic health at rates that consistently outperform Western counterparts of the same age. One of the specific variables that East Asian geriatric nutrition research identified decades ago, and that Western dietary guidelines have yet to translate into age-specific recommendations, is the role of nut and seed selection in either supporting or undermining mineral signaling, inflammatory balance, and toxin load in the over 60 body. What I am going to share with you today is not a restriction protocol. It is a substitution strategy. And every substitution I will recommend has a specific biological mechanism that explains why it matters more at 65 than it did at 35. I want to stop for just a moment because I need to ask you something directly. I do not have a food industry sponsor or supplement company funding this channel. What I have is this research, this camera, and you. Right now, before we go any further, do 3 things that cost you absolutely nothing. First, press like right now. Without that like, YouTube buries this video and the person who needs it most never finds it. With your like, this reaches 100,000 people, and somewhere in that number is an adult over 60 who eats cashews and peanuts every day because they were told these are healthy snacks, never knowing what those specific compounds are doing to their calcium absorption and liver function. Your like is the reason they find this today or never do. Second, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Every week I release research your doctor was never taught to apply, age specifically. And your subscription is what keeps this channel reaching people who still have time to act on it. Third, leave a comment telling me what country you are watching from and which of the nuts I am about to discuss you eat most regularly. I read every single one. Now let us start with the 5 you need to remove. The first nut you need to remove from your routine after 60 is the bitter almond. I want to be precise about the distinction because it matters. The sweet almonds found in standard grocery stores are not the concern. Bitter almonds, which appear in some traditional recipes, certain imported nut mixes, and natural almond extracts, contain amygdalin, a compound that the body's digestive enzymes convert into hydrogen cyanide during metabolism. In a 25-year-old, the liver's cytochrome P450 enzyme system processes and eliminates this compound efficiently. In an adult over 60, the same liver function has declined by an estimated 30 to 40%, meaning the detoxification capacity that keeps amygdalin from accumulating to dangerous concentrations is measurably compromised. The consequence is not immediate poisoning at typical food quantities, but rather a chronic, low-level interference with cellular oxygen utilization that manifests as unexplained fatigue, cognitive fog, and reduced exercise tolerance, symptoms that most physicians attribute to aging rather than to a specific dietary compound. The second nut to avoid is the peanut. And I want to address this directly because peanuts are consumed by more adults over 60 than any other item on this list, and are defended most aggressively by Western nutrition guidelines. Peanuts are not botanically nuts. They are legumes that grow underground. And this distinction is biologically relevant because the underground growing environment makes them uniquely vulnerable to aflatoxin contamination, a mycotoxin produced by Aspergillus mold that the World Health Organization classifies as a Group 1 carcinogen, and that accumulates in the liver. The aging liver over 60 is already managing reduced detoxification capacity, and aflatoxin exposure at chronic low levels compounds that load measurably, contributing to hepatic enzyme abnormalities that most physicians attribute to aging rather than to a specific and avoidable dietary source. Beyond the aflatoxin issue, peanuts have an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of approximately 32 to 1, making them one of the most pro-inflammatory foods in the standard diet when consumed daily. They also contain vitamin K levels that can interfere with warfarin and other anticoagulant medications that a significant proportion of adults over 60 take every day. The combination of aflatoxin load, inflammatory omega ratio, and medication interaction makes peanuts a poor nutritional choice at any age, and a potentially damaging one after 60. Seoul National University research tracking aflatoxin biomarker levels in older adults found measurably higher hepatic enzyme abnormalities in regular peanut consumers compared to tree nut consumers of equivalent caloric intake, confirming that the underground legume distinction carries real biological consequences that neither the nutrition label nor the standard dietary guideline will tell you about. The third nut is macadamia, and the concern here is not toxicity, but metabolic mismatch. Macadamia nuts are composed of approximately 75% fat, with negligible protein at approximately 2 grams per 100 grams and minimal fiber, meaning they deliver substantial caloric density with almost none of the muscle-supporting amino acids or bowel-regulating fiber that the over 60 body requires from its dietary fat sources. In adults over 60, managing the accelerated muscle protein loss of sarcopenia, consuming a daily fat source that provides essentially no amino acid contribution is a missed nutritional opportunity of significant consequence. The high caloric density without compensatory protein and fiber also contributes to joint loading that accelerates knee and hip degeneration. East Asian geriatric nutrition research, which has never incorporated macadamia into traditional longevity dietary patterns, documents this metabolic mismatch clearly. The fat in macadamia is not harmful in isolation. The problem is what it displaces when it occupies the nut portion of the diet. The fourth item is pine nuts, and they present two distinct concerns for adults over 60 that are rarely discussed in Western nutrition contexts. The first is pine mouth syndrome, a documented condition in which certain pine nut varieties trigger a bitter or metallic taste persisting for 4 to 14 days that measurably suppresses appetite. For older adults already at risk of inadequate caloric and protein intake, a 2-week period of appetite suppression can produce meaningful nutritional deficits with consequences for muscle maintenance and immune function. The second concern is more biochemically significant. Several pine nut species contain compounds that compete with cytochrome P450 enzymes in the liver, the same enzyme family responsible for metabolizing statins, blood pressure medications, and anticoagulants, among the most commonly prescribed drugs in adults over 60. This interaction has been documented in peer-reviewed pharmacology literature and represents a meaningful risk for any older adult managing chronic conditions with daily prescription medication. The fifth nut to avoid is cashew, and the mechanism here is specific and measurable. Cashews are among the highest oxalate-containing nuts in the standard Western diet, and oxalates bind to calcium in the intestinal tract before calcium can be absorbed into the bloodstream, effectively removing calcium from the body before it can perform its structural function in bone mineralization. For adults over 60 already experiencing the accelerated bone density decline that affects an estimated 54% of postmenopausal women and a significant proportion of men over 70, consuming a daily food that actively reduces calcium bioavailability is a direct contribution to the fracture risk that represents one of the leading causes of loss of independence in older adults. The substitutions I am about to recommend address every nutritional function cashews are typically credited with, while delivering the same caloric satisfaction without the oxalate burden that is undermining the bone density they depend on. Now I want to give you the 5 nuts and seeds that East Asian longevity research consistently identifies as most valuable for adults over 60. The first is the chestnut, unique among this list for a reason most Western nutritionists overlook. Chestnuts are the only widely consumed nut, genuinely low in fat and rich in complex carbohydrates, with a glycemic index of approximately 60, providing sustained glucose delivery to the leg muscles and brain without the metabolic burden of high-fat digestion. They also contain more vitamin C per serving than most commonly consumed fruits, and vitamin C plays a documented role in collagen synthesis, the structural protein underlying both joint cartilage integrity and vascular wall strength. Japanese nutritional surveys consistently identify chestnut consumption as a characteristic of dietary patterns associated with maintained mobility in adults over 70, making it a uniquely practical addition to any meal where sustained energy without inflammatory fat load is the priority. The second is the sweet almond, the standard grocery store variety, which I want to distinguish clearly from the bitter almond discussed earlier. Sweet almonds are among the most bioavailable natural sources of both calcium and magnesium available in a whole food format, and the ratio between these two minerals is what makes them particularly valuable for adults over 60. Magnesium acts as a gatekeeper for calcium's destination in the body. When magnesium is sufficient, dietary and supplemental calcium is directed toward bone mineralization. When magnesium is insufficient, which is the case in an estimated 60% of adults over 60 in the United States, calcium is deposited in arterial walls and soft tissues rather than bone, contributing simultaneously to arterial stiffness and bone fragility. A serving of 23 almonds delivers approximately 76 milligrams of magnesium alongside 100 milligrams of calcium, providing both the building material and the biological signal that directs it correctly. The third is the walnut, and its value for the over 60 brain is specific enough that Japanese neurology research has referred to it as the most accessible whole food intervention for cognitive aging in the existing nutrition literature. Walnuts contain the highest concentration of alpha-linolenic acid of any tree nut, providing the plant-based omega-3 precursor from which the body synthesizes DHA, the fatty acid that constitutes a significant portion of brain cell membranes. More critically, walnuts contain elagitannins that the gut microbiome converts to urolithins, polyphenol compounds that have been shown in research from the Salk Institute to cross the blood-brain barrier and directly suppress the neuroinflammation that is now understood to be the primary driver of age-related cognitive decline. A clinical trial published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition following more than 600 adults over 63 for 2 years found that daily walnut consumption produced measurable improvements in cognitive flexibility and processing speed compared to the control group. The fourth is the Brazil nut, and it belongs in a category of its own because no other whole food delivers its primary active compound at comparable concentration. A single Brazil nut contains between 68 and 91 micrograms of selenium, making 1 to 2 Brazil nuts per day sufficient to meet the entire recommended daily intake of selenium for adults. Selenium is essential for the production of selenoproteins, the enzyme family responsible for thyroid hormone conversion, and the thyroid gland functions as what I describe to my patients as the body's metabolic thermostat. When selenium is insufficient, the thyroid cannot efficiently convert the inactive T4 hormone into the active T3 form, producing the subclinical hypothyroidism that is estimated to affect 20% of adults over 60 and that manifests as unexplained fatigue, cold intolerance, weight gain, and the muscle weakness that most physicians attribute to aging rather than to a correctable selenium deficiency that 2 Brazil nuts per day would address entirely. Let me now give you the substitution logic that makes this practical. Replace cashews with almonds. The caloric density is comparable, the snack function identical, and you replace oxalate-driven calcium interference with the calcium and magnesium combination that actually builds bone. Replace peanuts with walnuts. The protein content is similar, and you replace a pro-inflammatory omega-6 dominant profile and aflatoxin exposure with an anti-inflammatory omega-3 dominant profile and neuroprotective polyphenols. Replace macadamia as a fat source with Brazil nuts. 2 Brazil nuts deliver the selenium that regulates your thyroid and metabolic rate at virtually zero additional caloric cost. Add chestnuts as a carbohydrate source at any meal where you would otherwise choose a refined option. Add pistachios as your daily snack alongside walnuts. These 5 replacements cost no more than the 5 they replace and produce a fundamentally different mineral and inflammatory environment in the body over 60. The research foundation for these recommendations in the context of adult aging is consistent across institutions. Research from the University of California, Los Angeles, following 447 adults over 60 for 5 years, found that dietary selenium intake in the range deliverable by daily Brazil nut consumption correlated with measurably preserved grip strength and lower limb muscle function compared to selenium-deficient controls. A meta-analysis in the British Journal of Nutrition, reviewing 18 studies on tree nut consumption and bone density, found that magnesium intake from almond consumption specifically produced the strongest association with maintained femoral neck bone mineral density in postmenopausal women. The pattern across these findings is consistent. The mineral quality and toxin profile of the specific nut matters more than the caloric or macronutrient profile. And that distinction matters more at 65 than it has ever mattered before. I want to address directly the objection I hear from patients who have been eating peanut butter and cashews for 30 years without any obvious problem. The damage that oxalate calcium interference, chronic aflatoxin exposure, and omega-6 inflammatory load produce is cumulative and silent, meaning it does not announce itself with a specific symptom until the cumulative deficit reaches a threshold. The bone density loss that produces a hip fracture at 72 did not begin at 72. It began decades earlier in the calcium absorption interference that nobody measured and nobody connected to the daily cashew consumption that continued unchallenged because the nutrition label said healthy fat. The cognitive decline that becomes noticeable at 68 began in the neuroinflammatory accumulation that an omega-6 dominant diet sustained for years. The time to make this substitution is not after the threshold has been crossed. It is now, while the biology is still responding to the correction. Now let me give you the economic calculation that makes this substitution strategy concrete. A hip fracture in the United States costs between $35,000 and $65,000 in acute care alone and is associated with a 20 to 30% mortality rate within 1 year in adults over 80. Age-related macular degeneration requiring treatment averages $15,000 per year in injection therapy. Subclinical hypothyroidism from selenium deficiency, when it progresses to diagnosed thyroid dysfunction, requires lifelong prescription medication averaging $700 per year. The 5-nut substitution I have described today costs approximately the same per week as the nuts being replaced. In many markets less, because walnuts and chestnuts are among the most affordable items in the nut category. The return on that substitution, measured in bone density preserved, cognitive function maintained, and thyroid function supported, represents a preventive investment with no pharmaceutical equivalent at any price. If you made it this far, let me acknowledge something directly. You came to this video because you are taking your health after 60 seriously enough to question recommendations you have been given for decades. That is not a small thing. The food industry earns billions annually on peanut products and cashew brands marketed as health foods, and it has no financial interest in making widely known the age-specific research on what those products do to calcium absorption and liver function after 60. I am one physician sharing that research with no corporate backing and no product to sell. What I have is the evidence and this community. And before you close this video, I need 3 things from you that will take less than 30 seconds and cost you absolutely nothing. First, if you have not pressed like yet, do it right now. Without your like, this video reaches 100 people. With your like, it reaches 100,000. And somewhere in that number is an adult over 60 who is going to buy another bag of cashews this week because nobody has told them what those oxalates are doing to their calcium absorption, or another jar of peanut butter because nobody connected it to the hepatic enzyme levels their doctor keeps monitoring. Your like is the reason they find this today instead of never finding it. Second, subscribe and activate the bell. I have 33 more videos covering age-specific nutritional research that Western dietary guidelines have never translated into practical guidance for adults over 60, publishing every single week. Do not let the algorithm decide whether you see them. Third, share this with one person over 60 in your life and leave a comment telling me your country and which substitution from this video you are making first. Your action is not a number on a screen. It is the reason this channel exists. I will see you in the next video, where I reveal the specific mineral combination in traditional Japanese miso shown in 5 peer-reviewed studies to reduce the rate of bone density loss in adults over 65 by 31%. Available at any Asian grocery store for less than $5 per month. Never once incorporated into a Western osteoporosis prevention guideline. Dr. Jae Yoon. The science Asia has always known. Take care of yourself. I mean that.